whether anyone watching is retired yet or thinking of retirement, and whether what Rachel Reeves is possibly going to announce in the next few weeks is scaring you rigid and actually making you think of buying abroad and maybe retiring abroad. I don't know, but that was in the back of my mind as I was looking around a couple of beautiful houses.
It's an interesting point, though. Is it actually any better abroad?
I don't know. You see, that's it. You need
you always
a lot of advice.
Better elsewhere, but it's not necessarily you've got to get, like, if you went to Spain, for example, a lot of people do, you've got to get residencia now, which is very difficult because of Brexit and all the rest of it. So it's quite difficult, actually. So whether it's any better anywhere else, I don't know. But anyway, the budget is putting chills through a lot of us this morning.
Yeah, in fact, anyway, if you are keen on going on holidays, for instance, the Daily Mail is leading particularly on the fact that she may even put up the taxes on air passenger duty, which would mean that airfares would go up, basically. And that might actually penalise you if you're the sort of person who likes a couple of holidays a year.
But, of course, working people aren't going to be hit, are they? That's what we were told during the election.
But working people don't go on holidays?
Yeah, well, apart from the fact that millions of taxpayers could find themselves paying a higher rate of tax, income tax, after the budget.
Yeah, that's as she prepares to extend the freeze on income tax thresholds, which Labour previously criticised, actually, as being a stealth tax.
Well, it comes as the NHS is also expected to be handed billions of pounds in the budget after accepting it must make fundamental reforms to the service.
Now, bosses within the health service, however, have refused to promise that the cash will be enough to meet Labour's manifesto pledge of reducing waiting lists.
Well, let's talk to political commentator Theo Usherwood, who's here. Good to see you this morning, Theo.
Lovely to be here.
I don't know what to say about this, really, because it seems like incredibly grim news, except we already knew it was going to be grim, because that's what the Prime Minister told us.
So, look, let's start with this, what the plans are around freezing the income tax threshold, because, of course, there was that triple lock promise in the Labour manifesto ahead of the election, and Keir Starmer's insisting that he's going to keep to that, and that was not to increase VAT, national insurance contributions or income tax. Now, technically, you could say that Labour has no plans to increase income tax whatsoever, and it won't increase whether it's the basic rate or the higher rate or indeed the additional rate. However, what they are looking to do is to stick with the thresholds beyond 2028, 2029, and that's going to leave more people. And we're not talking about rich people here.
No.
We're talking about people on modest incomes. We're talking about senior nurses. We're talking about teachers, maybe towards the end of their profession. Many of them will be watching this. We're talking about senior police officers on 50 grand a year and now going, or approaching 50 grand a year, who are suddenly going to get themselves a modest pay rise, 2 or 3%, and then get dragged into that higher rate of tax at 40p in the pound, and they're going to end up paying, some of them, if you're getting 2% pay rise and you go from 50 to 55 grand, you're going to be ending up paying an extra £1,000 in income tax. But it's very effective because there's no wriggle room, there's no way round it. And therefore it's going to raise the Treasury about £7 billion over the course of which was the end of the Parliament.
When would it come? When would it come in? When would it actually trigger?
Well, the Tories have already committed to that. They committed to that, and Labour said they weren't going to change that towards the 2028, 2029. Labour now is saying that they're going to extend it. And that's where the consternation is. Now, you might say that it's not a break in the... And there are
it's not, technically.
But technically, however, in November last year, and I'm reading a quote here from Rachel Reeves, when the Tories first extended, of course, the freeze on the threshold, she said, people on average earnings are paying more in tax because they are dragged into higher tax brackets. That is a sign of failure. The government is picking the pockets of working people. So in that, she appears to class those on, being dragged into the higher tax brackets as being working people. And Labour said they wouldn't increase taxes on working people. So actually, if you're looking at the spirit of it, maybe not the letter of of what's happening, they are breaking their manifesto.
Yeah, it is letter of the law to spirit of the law.
Yeah.
I mean, the argument being, of course, if you don't get a pay rise, then you're not going to be taxed anymore.
Precisely.
So, I mean, that's
Yeah.
That's the argument, isn't it? Amidst all of this, though, we're also told that the NHS, which we know needs reform, and they say, well, we will reform it, but we'll give them billions of pounds in the process.
So of course, this comes off the back of Lord Darzai's report, his review into the NHS, and he said that it needs reform. And they're looking particularly, and there will be accusations of the nanny state, but they're looking particularly at trying to keep people out of hospital with prevention, particularly focusing on obesity, how that links to heart disease. You can expect more demands for people to come in and check your weight while you're at work, eat fresh fruit and veg, ban on junk food adverts, that type of thing, to try and reform the NHS. But as part of Labour's promise to reduce waiting times, to ensure that people can get a GP appointment, they're not on the phone trying to get through it at 8:30 in the morning, desperate to get a GP appointment which they can't get, the NHS has secured a 3 to 4% a pay rise for next year and the year after, and that amounts to about £10 billion. And the deal is that in return, this was from Amanda Pritchard, the Chief Executive of the NHS, that the NHS is going to implement the reforms to try and keep people out of hospital. However, she does add a caveat where she said, OK, we're going to reform, but we're not necessarily, with this amount of money, this extra money, we're not necessarily going to be able to reduce waiting times to the levels that the government really wants.
But I seem to remember it was said time and again during the election campaign that the problem with the NHS and the reason it needed reform is that every government comes in boasting that they've put more and more money in, but it's not wisely spent, and that's why it just disappears down a drain hole.
Yes.
And yet they seem to be doing the same thing. They're promising more money and promising long-term reform, but at the moment, are we going to see anything back from the extra money they're putting in?
Well, that is a very good question. You can introduce, whether it's new computer systems or another layer of managers to try and get the NHS working better. That's been the concern previously, that actually these reforms don't amount to anything. But I think what Lord Darzai, who of course was a health minister under Gordon Brown and of course was a surgeon within the NHS, what he's trying to do and what the NHS is trying to do is actually ensure that people don't end up in hospital in the first place. But that is going to mean, potentially, the state playing a greater role in our lives in terms of telling us what we can eat, telling us to exercise, and in the hope that actually people live healthier lives and therefore don't suffer from things like morbid obesity, don't suffer from heart disease and the like.
But isn't it also, I mean, and that may well be the case, but isn't there an argument to say, well, perhaps that money is going to be put into primary care, so that which means things like, actually better services at pharmacies and more funding for pharmacies, better service at GPs, so actually things can be spotted earlier and to keep us out of hospital. And that would be welcome.
That would be very welcome, yes. And of course, the idea is, that the NHS, after COVID, we saw waiting lists spiral to 7 million. Elective operations now are very difficult to secure on the NHS within any reasonable period of time. And then Wes Streeting also wants to bring in the private sector as well to try and ease the backlog. But it does feel, I think there are those who feel that, and when they hear this and they read this from Amanda Pritchard about this extra settlement, financial settlement, we'll be thinking, how much more money does the NHS need? And I think it's fine if the reforms, as you say, Stephen, if the reforms are delivered, if people go to A&E and instead of waiting, and last time I was in A&E, there was a lad sat next to me who was there for 36 hours. If people see the results where actually, they're in A&E for 2 or 3 hours and they get seen, they get treated, and they come out the other end and they feel better and they're back in the workforce, which is what Labour want to happen, then I think actually the public will be quite forgiving about this extra money. But if people see the NHS getting more money but don't see the results in return, then I think people are going to start scratching their heads. And that's going to be up to Amanda Pritchard, ultimately, to deliver.
And it just still seems, for Rachel Reeves delivering her budget, that she talks about the huge black hole, the financial black hole, the money she's going to need for the NHS and all the rest. You wonder where else she's going to claw it from. And the Daily Mail front page today is talking about the income tax thresholds obviously being frozen and everything, but also maybe she's going to increase the tax on air passenger duty, which would have not only an effect on ordinary people's ability to pay their airfare, but it's going to clobber the airlines, who already feel clobbered.
Yes, and of course, the airlines, they operate on thin margins and they provide hundreds of thousands of jobs right across the economy, in terms of people going on holiday and airports are, places like Heathrow or Gatwick or Stansted, these are the hubs for the main employers in their communities. So, but I think what's happening a little bit at the moment, and it's something that's called sort of bringing out your dead, is that the Treasury are floating all of these ideas, and then over the next 2 weeks, see what sticks, and it's up to the various organisations that represent, whether it's the airports, whether it's the drivers' associations, to come forward and say, actually, this isn't going to work. So by contrast, there's a conversation taking place about fuel duty, and the RAC has actually come out and said, don't worry about the fuel duty freeze, because actually a lot of the big, providers, oil, fuel providers actually just take it in profit anyway. So I think that's where the Treasury, when these ideas are floated, don't see resistance. I think those are the ideas that are going to stick.
All right, and look, it's all well and good. We don't like it when we have to end up paying more in
Nobody
tax.
likes. No.
However, there can be an understanding if you say, well, it's got to be raised from somewhere. We are short of money, and people can understand that to an extent. However, the whole point of Labour's argument pre-election was that we were going to improve the country by economic growth.
Yes.
We were going to grow the economy. That generates more revenue, more tax revenue. Everything looks rosier. None of these measures seem to help growth. In fact, they all sound like they will stifle growth.
So I think Labour has a slightly different idea about how they secure economic growth. So what I mean by that is that you rightly point out, and this is a view that's held, I think, conservative view, as well, and not necessarily held on the left of the Labour Party, but where you would make the argument, let's say, national insurance. Are you going to start clobbering employers with an increase in national insurance contributions? And your viewers will be there tapping their fingers on the table. Many of them will have small businesses and they'll go, shall I take on that extra person? Or is it just now not worth it? Labour doesn't necessarily tap into that mindset. It doesn't have a huge amount of experience in business at the very top of government and amongst its MPs, so it doesn't necessarily understand the kind of choices that people are making in that regard. The way they're looking at it is to try and look much more big picture in terms of major infrastructure projects. We're talking about onshore wind farms. GB Energy is crucial to this in securing major foreign investment from abroad to come into this country and set up, put in, private sector comes in with money, and then the government puts forward its own money as well, and then that creates jobs and tax receipts as a result. So they have a slightly different vision. OK, they want economic growth, we all want economic growth, but how we actually get there. And they don't necessarily see small businesses, the private sector, at a quite low level, being the stimulus for economic growth in the same way as you do, Stephen.
OK. Theo, good to see you. We'll catch you later on, I think. Thanks very much indeed.